Law Badge by Peter Field. Read by Mr. Stuff and Such. Chapter 1. Gabe Hardy's ranch wagon lay overturned amidst the still heaps made by dead stock, and what had been the sodden log house was charred and a blackened ruin. Smoke curled up from the embers, crawling a careless symbol across the vivid New Mexico sky. It made a plain reading of what had happened here in the first faint lights of dawn. There had been a little warning. The flash of stolen carbons, a high-pitched Apache yelp, and then the swift rush of naked painted bronze-skinned devils. It must have been all over in a matter of a few minutes. Gabe had never gotten more than a few dozen feet from the door, and he lay still where he had fallen. The rest of his family, a fated wife and two young sons, were near at hand. Running his eye over the grim scene, Clark Rayburn stepped out of the saddle. He made a tall, high-shouldered shape as he stood there. His mouth was a thin line, and the curve of his lean jaw had hardened. Fay Dutcher said bleakly, "They made a clean sweep. I thought Geronimo was 200 miles away over west." "He probably is. This'll be Halpye's work." Halpye was an Apache war chief, young, hard, and ruthless, who sat at Geronimo's side in the councils. Rayburn gave his brother Puncher a glance. "See if you can find a spade in the barn." Dutcher nodded. Short and stocky, a rawhide knot of a man, he moved off. He returned shortly, bearing a stable fork and a broken shovel. "Over here," Rayburn told him. They set to work. Half an hour saw the shallow trench completed. Charred blankets were found in the half-burned barn in which to wrap the bodies, and they were laid to rest in silence. Dutcher straightened. "Reckon we don't know the right words," he said awkwardly. "Words won't help him now," Rayburn grunted. A dozen years of this scarcely settled range, where white men packed the only law that was worn in shiny leather, had hardened him to such things, but only on the surface. Dutcher, a roving cowboy from eastern Kansas, just now worked for Case Gunnarson's vast Bar 88, as was Rayburn, was much the same. 20 minutes later, Fay flung down the shovel. "Nothing more we can do, Clark." They swung into the saddle. Rayburn swept the canyons and the golden cedar-dotted slopes with a practiced eye, and the peace and the emptiness of the range this morning in itself was ominous. "We'll head over for Cottonwood Stage Station," he said. Their first glimpse of the station, a dozen miles across the hills from Hardy's homestead ranch, was reassuring. Nothing had gone wrong here as of yet. Stage horses switched at flies in the big corral, and the tender came to the door of the raw station building as they drew in. Middle-aged and gnarled, he gave them a broken-toothed grin. "Howdy, boys, get on down." Dutcher blasted his complaisance with 4 words. "Hank," the face said, "the engines are out." "Huh? Again?" Hank exclaimed, his smile fading. "Now what?" Dutcher told what had happened at Hardy's ranch, and the others swore at the end. "Damn their stinking red hides," he burst out. "Gabe Hardy was a good man, and that poor wife of his and them kids." Rayburn moved about restlessly while they talked, and he turned back to put it in question. "Is the Salt Creek stage late this morning?" "Yeah, about an hour or so. It was due here around noon." Hank nodded. His face stiffened at the significance of the fact as it struck home. "Rayburn, you don't reckon old Rocky Run's in trouble?" "I don't know," was the answer. Hank's Mexican helpers, who followed all this, were jabbering together excitedly, now raised a cry, and one of them pointed up the stage trail, winding around to the north. Rayburn spotted a rolling dust ball at a distance of several miles. It was coming this way, and the others saw it too, and they stared intently, and finally Hank jerked a nod. "It's the stage," he declared, relief in his tone. "She's rolling right along." Even before it arrived, they knew all they needed. Rocky Hardin, the bearded driver, was still pushing the team, and jutted from the cracked and faded paneling of the coach body, several feathered arrows could be seen. Hardin drew up with a scattering of dust and gravel, hauling the horses back on their haunches. "By Godfrey, talk about a close call!" he ejected, climbing down from the box. At Dutcher's urging that he tell his story, he drove on. "Bunch of Apaches jumped me at Sandy Wash. There must have been a dozen of 'em. I gave 'em hell and plowed right through. There sure was a plenty of shooting there for a while, and they dogged me for 3-4 miles. Danged if I don't know yet how I got through." "Hawpeye!" the stage tender barked incredulously, and old Rocky grunted. "Yeah, it was him all right." Rayburn heard that much and then stopped listening as, opening the stage door to let the passengers out, his glance encountered that of a pale, level-eyed girl inside. She was alone, her flounced dress taking up most of one seat on the coach, but what Rayburn noticed first was the resolute curve of her chin and the erect set on which her head was held, as though nothing had happened and nothing would happen to destroy her calm self-possession. "Thank you," she said, in a small, tense voice when he helped her down. Her eyes were gray, flecked with a warm brown, and the tendril of hair showing beneath the closely fitted bonnet was honey-colored. Rayburn stood, hat in hand, and watched her enter the stage station. When she was gone from sight, Fay Dutcher said, "What's that?" in a battering tone, and Rayburn gave him a look that cut off the rest. The Mexicans were taking care of the horses, and Hank made for the cook shack at the rear of the station. Rayburn said to the stage driver, "Who's that girl, Hardin?" Rocky gave him a shrewd glance. "Colcord," he said. "That's her name. Understand she got on at Fort Gibbon over in Kansas, and her father's the Salt Creek sky pilot." Rayburn placed the girl. He knew Bronson Colcord in Salt Creek, 40 miles to the southwest, by sight at least. The minister of the gospel had come into the country a full year ago, and somehow he had managed to build a small wooden church in a cow town, and now his daughter was joining him. Shaking his head, Rayburn said, "This ain't no country for her kind." "I reckon it ain't," old Rocky admitted. "All the same, I don't want to be the man to tell her that." Rayburn smiled. He knew what the old man meant. There was a high-spirited look about the girl that was impossible to misread. It said that she would look out for herself, that she might be here yet, long after the country had changed. They moved inside, and a moment later the tender called them to dinner. Rayburn helped the girl to a seat at one end of the table on which a Mexican woman was placing food, and again she thanked him, her quiet, reserved voice inviting no friendliness. And seated directly across, Fay Dutcher stole repeated, frankly admiring glances at her face, but Rayburn paid strict attention to his plate. Even so, he was aware that she was not eating. As if coming to a decision, she put down her fork and said to Hardin, "We will go on at once, of course, driver." Rocky eyed her and wagged his grizzled head. "Yeah, we'll go on directly," he answered her. "Don't you fret, Miss Colcord. We'll be all right. Lest them devils take a notion to bushwhack us, and Even then, I reckon we can stand 'em off again if we have to." He went on about the raid on the Hardy ranch of which he had been told. Silently cursing the old man's loose tongue, Rayburn had his quick look at the girl, and to his surprise, she appeared in no wise distressed. She had even shown relief at Hardin's words. For no reason that he could name, he wanted to help her. Thrown together here by chance, they might never meet again. And yet, some quality of her demanded more than the average man's willingness to ensure a woman's safety. "Fay Dutcher and we'll see that you get through," he told Hardin. "We'll tail you to Robert's station." Lorena's Colcord's gray eyes went to him as he spoke. This type of man, tall and blue-eyed, quiet of manner, was no stranger to her. She had met his counterpart many a time over, reckless, yet capable, spendthrift of youth and daring, poking into the far waste places of the West and fronting its dangers with easy indifference, yet likable too. There was a homely touch in Clark Rayburn's strong face which inevitably appealed to women. Recognizing it, she discounted it with the same cool poise which characterized her relations with all men except her father. Old Rocky said, "Well, if you're heading that way, you might as well ride her along, Rayburn." Hank's Mexicans had the stage hitched up by the time they were ready to go, and Hardin was the last to emerge. Gathering the lines, he spat importantly and then climbed to the box. His whip cracked, and the stage jerked with a start. Though she had never laid eyes on it before, there was nothing new in this land for the girl. After several days of it, fold upon fold, it rolled away in every direction. Distant, meandering creeks were marked by patches of green, and all else was dry and brown. The ranges of the hills melted into still farther ranges, and hour after hour the stage rolled on. Without awareness of what she did, Loren listened repeatedly for the soft clopping of hooves from the rear where Rayburn and Fay Dutcher were jogging. Somehow, knowledge of their presence was a comfort. But if she was aware of them, there was no less consideration of her. At last Dutcher broke the long silence, his first words revealing the direction of his thoughts. "Colcord must be crazy asking a girl like her to come out and live in Salt Crick." "Well, Salt Crick ain't what it was even a year ago," Rayburn reminded him quietly. Fay grunted. "Well, there's plenty of women there now, and that's a fact. That's the trouble with it." "Miss Colcord, she'll get along." "You ain't fell for it, have you, Clark?" Dutcher grinned. "Do you think I have?" Fay failed to note his evasion. A moment later he was speaking of something else, while Loren listened to their murmuring voices without distinguishing their words. The sound wove a pleasant pattern through her thoughts, after the hours of creaking and grating, punctuated by the crack of old Rocky's whip. There was one sound for which her ears strained, even while she prayed it wouldn't come. That was a shrill, high-pitched yelp, followed all too soon by the bark of rifles and a furious rush of madden-driven ponies. There was a nerve strain even in its continued delay, for despite the emptiness and the seeming peace of the afternoon, she wasn't wholly deceived. Her father had written her that life depended on a slim thread in this godless land. Already she was finding it distressingly so. Time after time, she leaned to the window to scan the rolling range. Always there was nothing to be seen. It seemed that it was always that way. Suddenly, the renewed sound of voices fixed her attention. They were speaking louder now, and one of the punchers rode up beside the stage to speak to Hardin. It was Rayburn. As he passed the window, she thought that he looked singularly self-reliant, sitting his saddle straight and easy, and there was even a touch of alertness in his clean-boned face. She did not catch what he said to the man on the box, but saw him pointing. Glancing in the direction he indicated, she saw nothing at first. Then she descried the faint penciling of smoke from a low ridge a mile or more to the west. It was not a straight column, but it was broken up into puffs. Gazing at it, her arms stiffened, and her hands became fists at her side. If there was any doubt left at the meaning of the smoke signals, it was dispelled when old Rocky whipped the horses to a run. Cantering down into a canyon, the stage followed it for half a mile. It was worse than remaining in the open, since nothing could be seen beyond the crumbling earthen banks, and the road rose again in a steep pitch, and now Hardin lashed the horses wildly, yelling at them. Loren thought for a moment that the sharp crack of his whip was a rifle report. But when Fay Dutcher's Winchester crashed, she knew. "Feed the leather to them horses," the puncher yelled a second later. "We ain't wasting no time here." From the window, Loren saw the string of savage riders a mile to the rear. A dozen strong, they came racing on fleet ponies. There was no befeathered glory about them, a sinister, businesslike lack of marking on this war party. The girl's pulse jumped as Rayburn fired. A second and a better look showed her 3 warriors had somehow driven closer, either by virtue of better horse flesh or because they had been an advanced guard. Even as she seen them, one flung up his carbine and pulled the trigger, and dust puffed at the side of the trail. Dutcher replied deliberately, and it did not escape Loren that he and his companion never fired together. The stage rocked drunkenly, forcing her to hang on lest she be flung from one side to the other, and old Rocky was getting the best that he had out of them horses. But there was no chance of the heavy vehicles distancing from the pursuers. Steadily the Indians drew up, and courage stiffened to apprehension in her when they advanced on both sides until they were even with the stage. Rayburn and Dutcher were shooting steadily, spacing their shots in a way that was more telling than a fusillade. Loren saw a painted savage tumble off his pony on Rayburn's side, but the latter's grim face as he worked the bolt of his rifle told nothing of his thoughts. The crash of old Rocky's gun as he fired from the box made her draw back, but he did not slacken the wild pace of his driving. Even when the Apaches raced ahead, he thrust on furiously. Rayburn had referred to Robert's Station, the next stop, by name. She could not avoid asking herself if they would ever reach the place, or if this was the end. Rayburn's face appeared at the window, and he gave her a curious, yet penetrating look. "You worried?" he asked. Her attempt at a smile was not very successful, but in the same moment the thought crossed her mind that there was something about him different from other men. She dismissed it as a fancy born of stretched nerves. "Of course, but I'm glad you're with us, you and Mr. Dutcher." He nodded swiftly. "We'll get through." He disappeared from sight as a burst of firing sounded, and she heard his rifle bang once, then twice in quick succession. Was he only pretending an assurance he didn't feel, she wondered. But that thought, too, was rejected. Somehow the confidence that had rung in his tone had been communicated to her. A Comanche war whoop from old Rocky told of another warrior falling. And with that, the firing slackened. A last slug thudded into the side of the stage, and she saw that the savages had drawn off beyond range, though they still hung on, yelling defiance and rage. When the pace moderated at length, Loren looked out to see the buildings of another stage station across the level. It was low and long and built of adobe. Several cottonwoods bordered the creek which flowed past the place. She saw that much, and then gave ear to a good-humored remark from the men. They were dust-stained and tense, but they were jubilant. "By God, we made her again," old Rocky was bragging in his high-pitched voice. "Take more'n a passel Apaches to stop this hombre." "Right again, Hardin." Dutcher grinned at him. "If it hadn't been for you, I don't know how Clark and me would have got through." He tossed a wink at Rayburn, and then gazed keenly towards Robert's station, as if something awaited them there which, to him, for one, was looking forward to. End of Chapter 1.